About 4 months ago, a 45-year-old mechanic from Southern California named Rene Compion decided to go for a solo hike on an Angeles National Park trail. Although Rene had hiked these trails more times than he could count, this particular day he chose to venture off onto a new path and see some new sights. Joy and wonder and elation began to turn to concern when Rene turned around to head back to his car and realized that he had lost his bearings. Nothing looked familiar. His sense of direction had twisted and turned. Suddenly there was no clear path, yet 1,000 options of which direction to travel. Concern quickly turned to fear as he thought, what now? As the air cooled, he made a choice to climb to a higher elevation in an attempt to get some cell phone service. He managed one bar, but noticed that his cell phone battery was down to its last 10%. Again, through his panic and fear, his mind reeled. What now? That's when he snapped a picture of his soot-stained legs and sent it to a friend along with this text message. SOS. My phone is going to die. I'm lost. His phone painfully tried to send the picture, struggling to dispatch every pixel. Finally, the message sent, and then his phone went dead. It was later discovered that Rene's location settings were turned off, so it was impossible to know where he actually was. Rene's friend received the text and contacted the search and rescue service, but they were at a loss to know where to start looking for Rene. All night they were wondering, what do we do now? That's when one of the officers decided to send out a tweet. 60 miles away, a guy named Ben Kuo was at home and happened to see the tweet by the LA County Sheriff Department, posting a picture of Rene's legs and asking if anyone recognized the location. Ben, who worked in the tech industry, didn't recognize the location, but that didn't stop him. In fact, that just made him more interested. You see, Ben had an interesting hobby. He loved trying to identify where movie scenes, TV shows, and commercials were filmed. He often had great success, so he took the blurry image of Rene's legs, surrounded by an endless landscape of rocks and brush, and began pulling up satellite maps and coordinates using the details of the photo to narrow his search parameters. Finally, quite sure he had the location right, he pulled up Google Earth, cross-referenced the date and the time and the coordinates, and it was a match. Rene had survived a night at high altitude and the blustery winds and cold temperatures, but even his what now ideas were beginning to run out. He was hopelessly lost with no sign that help was on its way. A few hours later, armed with Ben's satellite coordinates, a helicopter with a rescue team located Rene right where Ben said he would be. And although the story turned out to have a great ending, I want to rewind it just for a moment back to the part where Rene was lost, the rescue team was lost, and Ben was looking at a photo and completely at a loss. Because that's where I think many of us are today, asking that somewhat desperate two-word question, what now? Over the last year and a half, we've walked an unfamiliar trail. We feel turned around and disoriented. The air feels cold. The hike is no longer enjoyable, and uncertainty has turned to fear. And as we begin to head into this fall and winter, many of us are asking, what now? We've not only lost so much, but if we're honest, we feel a bit lost. Well, I can assure you that this is a question that we as pastors and elders at Riverwood have been asking a lot. What do we do next? Which way do we head? What's our next move? What's our next step? When you feel worn down, vulnerable, disoriented, and like everything that was once familiar is gone, what now? Well, I don't think that it's an accident that our chapter-a-day reading adventure has us reading the book of Joshua through the month of September. This past Monday was day 949 of consistently reading one chapter a day and asking God, what are you saying to us through your word? Well, we only have 145 days left, and we will have read every chapter in the Bible, and if you haven't started yet or need to start again, you can find everything you need on our Riverwood app or on our website. But in chapter 1, we find a young leader named Joshua standing in the wilderness disoriented, stripped of the safe and familiar, utterly lost. Here's how Joshua 1:1 opens. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, Moses' assistant. He said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Those 5 words describe a disaster. Moses, my servant, is dead. The larger-than-life man with superhero status who had led captive Israel out of Egyptian captivity, the super leader who had wisely and patiently led the nation of Israel through the wilderness for 40 years, the father of the faith who had taught Israel what it was to listen, obey, worship, and follow God, the guiding light of the nation who embodied the vision and mission of a million-person fraternity of God worshipers, was gone, dead, and the nation was leaderless. They were camped in the desert, surrounded by people and nations who hated them, nomads without a home to call their own, no way forward, and certainly no way backward. More than once, they must have uttered those words, "What now? What in the world are we supposed to do now?" And you can be sure that when the leaders are asking, "What now?" the people are surely asking, "What's the point? Why are we even here? Where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish anyway? Is this even worth my time and effort? Is there even a pathway through this wilderness and lostness?" Can you relate to any of those emotions or questions? I know I sure can. I look around at Riverwood and I can hardly recognize it. Our worship communities have been shattered and scattered by COVID. Before COVID, each weekend, you had a pretty good sense of who you were going to see and talk to and catch up with at one of our 7 worship communities. But now there's no consistency, no familiarity, no certainty. Our children's and students' gatherings used to be bursting with life and kids and small group leaders and music and laughter, stories and life lessons in God's Word. But now the volunteers are few. The activities are distanced, and many parents are understandably hesitant. Our small groups, home groups, alpha, network support groups, used to be meeting in homes every week. The coffee was strong, the baking was sweet, and the relationships were so life-giving. And although many of the groups have moved to Zoom, it's just not the same. Riverwood used to be known for its radical and generous and very practical support of our local community, its genuine raise-the-roof worship, its energized and inspiring creativity, its everybody welcome warmth and friendliness. It used to be known for its everybody serve, everybody give, everybody serve, all in commitment to not just attend and consume, but to give and invest in the mission that God has given us. That's all been disrupted, obstructed, and interrupted. If we're going to be honest, there is a heavy blanket of grief and loss, along with some fear and uncertainty that is laying over most of our lives and certainly over our church. And so, along with Joshua, who was mourning Moses and asking, "What now?" today we're mourning what used to be. And as we dare to glance forward, we're asking the same question. What now? What are we supposed to do now? Church, can we just sit in our grief and our sense of loss and lostness and not rush right out of our anguish in an attempt to solve the problems? I think we need to acknowledge it, both personally and as a church family. In a few minutes, God is going to speak to Joshua, and I believe to us, some remarkably encouraging words that are going to strengthen us and answer the question, what now? But let's take a few moments to acknowledge our loss, our longing, and our need for God's help, direction, and strength. So a few minutes ago, we left Joshua standing at the grave of his mentor and leader and spiritual father, Moses, asking, "What now?" And this is what we read next. The Lord said, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the promised land that I'm giving them. Wherever you set foot, you will be on land that I've given you. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live, for I will be with you. I will not fail you or abandon you. Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions that Moses gave you. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left. Then you will be successful in everything you do. Meditate on it day and night, so that you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Church, there is so much in this ancient text for us today. And here's number one: new challenges require new faith. Joshua and the people of Israel were facing a totally new challenge that they had never faced before. They hadn't been in this situation before, and God was reminding them that yesterday's strengths and yesterday's victories won't cut it for today's challenges. God wanted to take the Israelites to places that they had never been before. God wanted to do something new in their lives and in their community. He wanted to do something they had never experienced before. But those old stories of what God used to do and those old experiences that they had with God years ago were going to be of little help here today. They needed new, fresh faith. They needed the latest version of faith and real-time trust in God. Church, God isn't calling us back to pre-COVID Riverwood ministry. God is calling us to something new. The world has changed over the last 18 months. And God wants to do something new in and through us, but we need to have new and freshly minted faith. None of that old faith that says, well, that's not how we used to do things. We haven't done it that way before. Let me ask you something. Are you looking backward, wanting to go back to how it used to be? Or are you looking forward to the new thing that God wants to do in and through you, in and through our church? Number one, new challenges require new faith for those new challenges. Number two, courage doesn't exist apart from mission. Only people who are actually doing something need courage. People who are not risking anything or attempting anything or venturing into uncharted territory have no need for courage. You don't need courage sitting at home and channel surfing. You don't need courage to fill up your calendar and your days with leisure and fun. You don't need courage to live for yourself. Only people who are on a mission attempting to do something beyond themselves need courage. People who realize that they have a call of God in their lives to live and to serve God, those people require immense amounts of courage. There's no need for faith apart from troubles and challenges, and there's no need for courage apart from mission. So I have to ask you, when was the last time you reassessed God's call in your life? God has uniquely stamped your life with a purpose and a mission. He's wired you, gifted you, energized you for that purpose and mission. What is it? When was the last time you refreshed and engaged in that mission? COVID has lulled many of us to sleep. COVID has caused many of us to reach for the pause button, waiting for some magical day when the pandemic will be over. COVID has consumed our thoughts, our news feeds, our emotions, and our decisions. But here's the deal. We don't worship a God named COVID. We're not called to serve, and we're not obliged to bow down to a God named COVID. We have a much greater God and a greater mission. Which brings me to this great question. What is our collective Riverwood mission? Well, many of you would know it by the little phrase L3 living. But let me give you the same mission and vision in a slightly different wording. Our mission as a church is to be a God-powered, unified, restorative force in the world. Our mission is to be Spirit-filled and God-energized. Our mission is to be unified and fused together in our love of Jesus and of other people. Our mission is to be a restorative force in the world that brings healing and uplifting hope to worried, hurting, and broken people. Our mission is not to put on worship services. Our mission is not to fill auditoriums with attenders. Our mission is not to build a community services organization. Our mission is not to have the most hyped up youth group or the best music or the smoothest broadcast. Our mission is to be a God-powered, unified, restorative force in the world. And wow, could the world use some of that today? Church, some of us aren't very God-powered these days. We're more fear-powered, we're opinion-powered, we're emotionally powered, but our God-powered gauge is slipping a little bit. Church, some of us aren't very unified these days. We've allowed vaccine mandates and politics and health orders to divide us and make us mean-spirited. That needs to stop today. And church, the only way we will be a restorative force in our world that God has called us to be is if we are full of grace, full of Jesus, and full of a heart to serve. God called Joshua to be strong and courageous, and the only reason he did that was because he had a mission that he was sending Joshua on. Those words might have been written 3,200 years ago, but they are echoing down the corridors of history and landing on our hearts today as fresh as the day that God spoke them. God is speaking them to you today because he has a mission for you, a mission that will take more than what you have and take you to places you aren't necessarily comfortable being in, but it's a calling on your life. Okay, new challenges require new faith. Secondly, courage doesn't exist apart from mission. And number three, God promised it, but you have to step into it. God's promises are unlocked with our footsteps. In chapter 2, Joshua sends spies into the promised land. And then in chapter 3, Joshua has the million-people nation move to the shores of the swollen Jordan River. God says to Joshua in verse 8, "Give this command to the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant. When you reach the banks of the Jordan River, take a few steps into the river and stop there." So Joshua told the Israelites, "Come and listen to what the Lord your God says. Today you will know that the living God is among you. Look, the Ark of the Covenant, which belongs to the Lord of the whole earth, will lead you across the Jordan River. The priests will carry the Ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of the water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall." So many times we want to see God move powerfully and miraculously, forgetting that his power, miracles, and promises are unlocked when we step into the river. But I want you to notice something. Stepping into a river and expecting it to stop flowing, split in two, and dry up is not rational or sane or reasonable. It's ridiculous. But that's the point. There is often a ridiculousness about taking that first step. In fact, God seems to specialize in calling his people to the ridiculous. Build a ship in the desert and load it full of animals. Step closer and listen to the voice in the burning bush. You need water? Go strike a rock. You need to conquer a city? Go march around it 7 times. You desperately need water? Dig a bunch of ditches in the dry ground. You need victory? Drop the armor and face the warrior giant with a slingshot. You need healing? Go dip yourself in a river, muddy river, 7 times. You're starving? Go gather as many empty jars as you can. Build an altar, stack it full of firewood, and then soak it with buckets of water. If you want to be great, be a servant. If you want to be rich, give your money away. Cast your net on the other side. Pass out baskets of a few fish and loaves to feed 1,000 people. Step out of the boat and walk on the water. Every one of these people must have stopped for a moment at least and thought, this is ridiculous. It's absurd. It's a backward strategy that doesn't make any sense. But when they took the first step into the ridiculous, a miracle was activated and a promise was unlocked. Church, we are the keepers of the ridiculous. So when you feel God's nudge saying, I want you to take that first step, go serve and give your life away. Go make a difference in that person's life. Take the first step to give some money away. Take that risk and go serve as part of a restoration team. Something in you is bound to protest and say, but this feels ridiculous and I'm not adequate for this. I understand. When I stepped into working with students and becoming a youth pastor, I protested. God, I'm not cool or good with students. This feels ridiculous. But I took that first step and God unlocked a miracle. When Carolyn and I lined up with 25 other people and all of us stepped together to start a new church in a high school 26 years ago, there was something quite ridiculous about it. And when that small group grew to 250 people and we found an old door factory welding shop and we asked people to sell their RVs and their vehicles and cash in their retirement funds and postpone their vacations so that we could buy our first building as a church, there was something altogether ridiculous about it. But as we each took that step, God met us and ignited a promise and a miracle. Having 6 buildings and 3 worship auditoriums and 7 services within a block of each other in the core part of the city is quite frankly ridiculous. Yet every time we take a step of faith and obedience, God unlocks another promise and ignites another miracle. Church, I'm not talking about tuning into a service or attending church. We've never believed that church is something that you watch or somewhere you go or attend. You don't attend church. You are the church. We're the ones called to take steps of faith into the ridiculous to unlock God's promises and miracles. We're the ones called to live God-powered lives, unified and bound together in a pledge to be a restorative force in this world. But that will never happen until every Riverwooder breaks camp, walks down to the river, and takes their first ridiculous step into the water. Only then will you see the waters part. So I have to ask you, even as I'm saying this, what is God speaking to your spirit? What is your Jordan River that God is calling you to step into? I know it sounds kind of ridiculous and certainly outside of your comfort zone, but don't ignore it, because it's in that crazy whisper of God's Spirit that a promise and a miracle gets unlocked. Number 3, God promised it, but you have to step into it. Most of us have felt a bit lost, and many of us are asking, what now? Well, let me help you answer that. We're going to remind each other that, number 1, new challenges require new faith. None of us have ever done church or life in the middle or partway through a pandemic before. This is new territory, but we're not going to be discouraged. We hear God saying, be strong and courageous. We're not going to worship COVID or fear or worry or uncertainty. We're going to worship our God who reigns above all other forces and who is as much on a mission today as he's ever been. Secondly, we're going to remember that courage doesn't exist apart from mission. Our mission as a church is to be a God-powered, unified, restorative force in the world. But beyond our shared mission, God has created you personally, uniquely, and has put in you a mission right in your heart. Do you know what it is? Do you know how he's gifted you and built you and wired you to grow his church and his kingdom? If not, wow, do you ever need to get in touch with that? Because it's that reason for which you exist. And that's not something you want to miss out on. And thirdly, we're going to move into the fall remembering that God promised it, but we have to step into it. I want to challenge you as lovingly and boldly as I can. Don't hide in your tent on the banks of the Jordan River and refuse to do your part. Brave the ridiculous, step into the river, and watch God unlock the promise and the miracle. And here's my prayer for this fall. God, give us fresh faith. We can't face these fresh challenges without a new move of you in our lives. God, give us new courage as we embrace the mission that you have us on individually and collectively as a church. Fill us with your Spirit. Unify us like we have never been unified before. Make us a powerfully restorative and redemptive force in this world. And God, give us courage this week to take the first step into a ridiculous, raging river and watch what you do with our obedience. Amen.